Get some! Welcome to Justice Day on the Young Turks. Cenk, Uygur, and Kasparian with you guys.
He's gonna be unbearable today.
Okay, well, a little bit. I'm gonna start out unbearable for sure. So one of our members, I Am Sock, came up with the idea of Justice Day. Of course, national holiday within a couple of years, for sure, I'm sure. Okay, Justice Coming did come out today. We have actual news for you guys, don't worry. We have tons and tons of news, of course, as always. Rudy's hurt, dog, don't ask him if he's all right. But first news about this. Number one, for those of you who want to sign copies, we are releasing the hounds. ShopTYT.com has a couple hundred more copies. Those will be the only ones that are signed for now, other than the ones at the book readings, etc. So go nuts if you want. Everybody can get it from wherever you want, and it's a little bit quicker from like the Amazons and the Barnes and Nobles, etc. Keeping it real at TYT.com/justice. The reason why it says bestseller there is all of a sudden bestseller on Barnes and Noble, bestseller on Amazon, bestseller on Apple. Now that is not the New York Times list and what is considered the quote unquote official list, but those are real. And so real quick, I'll read it to you guys, and then maybe by the end of the show it'll be even better. Amazon's #1 in social activist biographies. Not a biography, but I'll take it. I don't mind the wrong classification as long as I'm #1. Amazon #4 in the audiobooks overall. That is awesome. #7 in politics and commentary and opinion on Amazon. By the way, that's misleading because it's actually just Mark Levin and Thomas Sowell's books that are ahead of me. So it's actually #3 in a sense. Mark Levin's a radio guy. He has this giant infrastructure to sell books, and that's why everybody knew he was going to come in #1. Apple Books, so where did we come in? #2 in Apple, in politics and current events, and a lot more to go. You guys are amazing. You all did this. I didn't do a thing about it. I wrote a book. It could have had anything in it. You're the ones who bought it first. I'm super curious to see how you guys are going to like it. I can't wait for your comments on it. But now, without further ado, the news.
I just gotta say, I love how the initials for Justice is Coming is JIC. And the team used it.
JIC?
JIC,
yeah.
J-I-C. I'm into it. I think it sounds good.
I think the JIC is on me.
Yeah. All right. Well, the joke is on all of us because we're staring down another government shutdown. So let's get to the news of the day. The United States is staring down yet another government shutdown. Oh, the old recycled story, year after year, it's the same old thing, except this time there is quite a bit of chaos within the Republican Party, specifically in the House of Representatives. And even though the GOP allegedly reached some sort of deal in regard to a 1-month funding bill that would essentially extend and give them a little bit of time to negotiate a more robust long-term spending deal, there is a lot of disagreement even among Republicans in regard to this 1-month bill. So several House Republicans will not support the measure. They're already on the record saying as such. The proposal hammered out over the weekend would extend federal funding through October, according to the New York Times. Let me give you some more details. So it would cut the budgets of most federal agencies for the period by about 8%, while exempting the military, of course, veterans programs, and disaster relief. It would also restore some stringent Trump-era immigration policies. It does not contain funding for continued military assistance to Ukraine, money that the White House and both parties in the Senate have sought. So really, this 1-month bill to fund the government is a non-starter, even if Republicans, who have a slim majority in the House, approved it. It would get shot down in the House, in the Senate, I should say. Roughly a dozen Republicans made it clear that they were staunchly opposed to the proposal unveiled on Sunday, which combines a stopgap spending measure with steep funding cuts and new border controls, indicating they could not be induced to change their votes through leadership pressure. And what they really want, allegedly, I mean, it's interesting because every time McCarthy gives them what they want, they have some new goal. But in this case, they're claiming that they want to essentially defund the DOJ, the Justice Department, and in effect, do away with special counsel Jack Smith and his resources to pursue the indictment of Donald Trump. Now, a 30-day extension by the GOP to force an 8% cut to the Department of Justice and rest of federal bureaucracy is a cut to its weaponization while passing border security and whacking Department of Defense wokeness, according to Republican Representative Chip Roy, who's very much in favor of the 1-month bill. But some Republicans in swing districts are also kind of losing their minds right now. These are districts that Biden won in the 2020 presidential election. They feel that if Republicans don't act, if they do not fund the government, then they're the ones who will have to deal with the brunt of the backlash. They're concerned about their political careers, so they are urging the passage of a government spending bill as soon as possible. Representative Mike Lawler from New York, a Republican, falls under that camp, saying they don't know, meaning his Republican colleagues, they don't know how to take yes for an answer. They don't know how to define a win. They don't know how to work as a team. I will not support a government shutdown if they refuse to pass a continuing resolution. I will without them. Now it's really unclear what that means. You can't unilaterally pass any legislation. I don't know if he realizes that. But I want to go to this video quickly of Ryan Grimm kind of explaining the different possibilities and how each one of those possibilities has been shot down by the far right wing of the Republican Party. Let's watch.
You can pass an amended CR, which is say, we're going to continue funding the government, but we want these particular changes. And the House Freedom Caucus has put forward a CR like that includes a bunch of draconian kind of immigration and wokeness rules that won't go anywhere in the Senate and won't go anywhere in the White House. But even that has opposition from within the Freedom Caucus. So they can't pass that either. Then you can pass individual appropriations bills, kind of the way that Congress was designed to operate 200 plus years ago when it was built. Every committee passes its funding bill, you pass those bills, Senate passes its bills, president signs them, done, the government is funded. They can't even agree to do a defense bill. That's supposed to come to the floor today. It might not even pass. They can't agree, as McCarthy said, to do a Homeland Security funding bill. There are 10 other agencies and departments that would need to be funded as well. They can't do that in the next 11 days. They probably couldn't do that over the next year if you gave them that much time. So those are the three options. And the Freedom Caucus is standing in the way of all three of those options.
And the Freedom Caucus consists of the most conservative Republicans in the House. They're really the ones standing in the way of the passage of any government spending bill, stopgap bill, any of the possibilities that were just outlined by Ryan Grimm. Cenk, Congress is broken, but lately it feels even more broken than usual.
Yeah, so let me guarantee a couple of things. Shutdown, there's no way they're gonna get this done in 12 days. And then second of all, let me tell you the second part of the story that is near guaranteed, which is at some point, the Republicans that are more mainstream, establishment and corporate, whichever adjective you want to give them, and all of those are true, are going to have to work with the Democrats. These Freedom Caucus guys are, at least enough of them, are so unreasonable, so unbending. They're never gonna bend to anything. And the things that they're asking for, the Democrats, I mean, you cross your fingers, at least some of them for sure, they'll never agree to. The ones that they'll agree to are probably the spending cuts that help the donors, right? So that's what this whole charade is normally about. It's still about that largely here. I've now covered this for 20 years straight, where the Republicans go, oh no, we won't do that. You better give us spending cuts for the middle class and tax cuts for the rich. And then Democrats go, oh golly gee, we don't want them to shut down the government. Okay, here you go, right? So the problem with this play is that the extreme right now, and there's two silver linings here. The extreme right means it, and so this is not before it was just total charade, total theater. Remember the Tea Party? Didn't mean it at all, totally fake in terms of the politicians, not necessarily the voters. And so this time around, though, they're real. And that's silver lining number one. Wait, how's that a silver lining? Because some of them, like Matt Gaetz, have let go of corporate PAC money. And now the downside of that is that they are now attached. Yeah, they're attached to the most extreme end of their base that's funding their grassroots fundraising, okay? The upside of that is, for the first time in history, in my lifetime, there are Republicans that will not only do the bidding of corporate donors. I've never seen that in American politics. So that is a hell of a breakthrough and an interesting one, even though it comes with this massive baggage and massive downside. There's a second silver lining, which is I have never seen in 25 years of covering politics the Pentagon budget being questioned in any serious way. There's theater, semantics. In this case, I know it's about wokeness and that's dumb and it doesn't have anything to do with reality. But even the idea that Republicans are challenging the Pentagon in any way, shape, or form, and now some of the so-called moderate Republicans are saying, oh yeah, you know what we're gonna do? We're gonna accuse you of not supporting the troops. Like that's like the oldest playbook. And it's Republican on Republican crime now, which I've never seen like that.
No, it is kind of remarkable to see, because when you think about the Republican Party, especially as it pertains to foreign policy, I think the era of the neoconservative is, at least for the moment, being over, or at least their power and influence over government, Congress in particular, has kind of been diluted by people like Matt Gaetz. And while, look, the thing is, your silver linings, I totally understand what you're saying, and I think you're right about those silver linings. It's just that in this current political climate and in this context where average Republican voters and their loyalty to Donald Trump reigns supreme, they're gonna want some unreasonable things, including literally defunding the Department of Justice, which, whatever you think about the prosecution of Donald Trump, put that aside for a moment and maybe consider some of the unintended consequences of defunding the Department of Justice.
Yeah, so I don't want anybody to mistake what I'm saying. Obviously, I'm saying something unique in American media, which is that these right-wing guys who I totally, utterly disagree with, that there's a silver lining attached to them. But that doesn't mean it's a good thing overall, right? So the weighing of the interest is, oh, there's some breakthroughs that are not just corporate rule, that's great. But overall, the downsides are gigantic. What do you mean defund the entire Department of Justice? What does that mean? That's insane, right? So we're not gonna do any federal law enforcement. So if somebody's mailing anthrax, good luck to you. Pipe bombs, good luck to you. And by the way, if you're a right-wing white supremacist, you might be pretty thrilled about that. But there's a lot of things you're not gonna be thrilled about. You think like, the FBI doesn't do anything but bust right-wingers these days. Like, yeah, I'm sure. But anyways, even if you assume that was true, that they think that way, but brother, you're wrong about what the FBI does. The FBI does a lot of anti-crime, right? And so the mob, foreign governments, cartels, etc. Defunding the FBI and the Justice Department is just nuts, extreme nuts. And why? Because you were going to Hunter Biden. Oh, you went after our Donnie Trump. We love our Donnie Trump. So I'm not defending their madness at all. I'm just telling you. And when populism comes, it is as it is now, right? In the beginning, it's gonna be a roller coaster ride for sure throughout. And in the beginning, it's gonna take a dip. I mean, we're in the middle of that dip. We've been in the middle of that dip for 7 years as the right-wing populists go nuts. But at least they're on their side, they're hammering through the wall of corporate rule. On our side, we hammered through with Justice Democrats. We have a lot more hammering to do. So I'm telling you about a positive thing that's gonna happen years from now. For now, the government's gonna get shut down. These guys are never gonna agree to anything reasonable. They'll never agree with McCarthy. They can't find, and like I see media reports about, oh, if it's not McCarthy, who could bring these people together? Nothing could bring these people together. Because when you have one side saying, I would like the moon and Saturn pulled over into my backyard, well, you can't do that. It's not physically possible. So they're not gonna get agreement. They're gonna have to go to the Democrats, but that's gonna take a while.
Well, we'll obviously update you all on that story as it develops. for now, why don't we move on to something else, something entirely different, having to do with the migrant crisis, specifically in Manhattan.
I don't see an ending to this. This issue will destroy New York City. Destroy New York City. We're getting 10,000 migrants a month. Every community in this city is going to be impacted. The city we knew, we're about to lose.
You just heard from a Democratic mayor. That was Eric Adams, the mayor of New York City, essentially complaining about the tens of thousands of migrants that have arrived in Manhattan in recent months. In fact, the number currently sits at a total of 110,000. And the migrants obviously need a place to stay. They need services, and the current social safety net programs in New York specifically are beginning to buckle. There's a lot of frustration, a lot of anger. And while Mayor Eric Adams is complaining and also pointing his finger at Joe Biden and the federal government, it's important to know he's not the only one. Here's the governor of New York, Kathy Hochul.
The state has deployed enormous resources toward New York City's valiant efforts to shelter and support these nearly 100,000 migrants who have already arrived here. The reality is, we've managed thus far without substantive support from Washington. And despite the fact that this is a national, indeed an inherently federal issue. But New York has shouldered this burden for far too long. This crisis originated with the federal government, and it must be resolved through the federal government. The borders and decisions about who can work are solely determined by the federal government.
Now, say what you will about Kathy Hochul, the very last part of that statement was absolutely correct. It's just true. This is an issue that is dealt with on a federal level. And right now, states are dealing with basically the brunt of a very real crisis. Now, we're gonna get to Texas Governor Greg Abbott's role in all of this, because it actually has been overestimated in the press, and the reality is a little more complicated than that. But before we do, I want to give you a sense of what the people living in New York City are feeling about this issue. Let's watch.
There is consensus here across geography and states on increased federal resources to cities and municipalities dealing with this issue. The second is to allow for work authorizations so that the folks in here can get to work and start supporting themselves as soon as possible. They are prevented from getting jobs, they are prevented from employment, and that is part of the strain on our public systems. The faster that folks can access the work that they're asking for legally, the better we can solve this problem. And the third is extension of temporary protected status for Venezuelans, who are the largest population that are arriving here.
So there you have Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez attempting to address the issue as a sitting United States Congresswoman. And she is calling for something that I think most Democrats in the state of New York are calling for, which is let's expedite their workers' visas so these individuals can be self-sufficient, they can work, they can contribute to the economy. But the Biden administration has actually been pretty resistant to that, allegedly because they fear that expediting these workers' visas would actually encourage more migrants to attempt to come to the United States as asylum seekers. And when you hear the protests in the background as AOC is trying to speak, understand, look, I know that it's very easy to kind of brush them off as hateful people, but when you're already experiencing a lack of resources for your own community, for your own schools, you can understand where that rage kind of comes from. And I want to give you a quick sense of what I'm talking about. One more video, and then we'll open it up to discussion.
On opening day, kids rushing into the largest school system in the country, and it just got even bigger, with 21,000 new children of asylum seekers also starting classes today in New York. Mayor Eric Adams is frustrated with the steady wave of migrants. He says the city is overwhelmed with 10,000 arriving a month, straining city services and creating a desperate need for help from Washington. The schools face the growing task of providing academic resources, supplies, a more diverse staff. Many do not have bilingual programs.
Last year it went from like 20 kids to like almost 30 kids in a classroom.
It's gonna make it tough. It's gonna make it tough. Somebody's gotta solve these problems.
So this is a very real problem. It is in fact a crisis. As I said, I'll get to the Texas governor's role in this and how it actually has been overestimated quite a bit. But before I do, I'm really curious what you think so far, Cenk, about what places like New York and Chicago are dealing with and how they claim there's been a lack of a response from the federal government.
Yeah. So look, I said this on day one. I'm gonna repeat it even with greater fervor today. I think that what Texas did makes sense. And so I know that a lot of people on the left don't want to hear that, but think about it, guys. So they had this immigration problem all along, and it wasn't spread out to many different states. It was just in Texas, and of course the other border states. And the federal government kept saying, I don't care. Okay. Now, to be fair to the federal government, it doesn't just quite say that. It has a lot of different programs in place. The idea that there's open borders is nonsense. No, there's a border and they enforce it. They return people all the time, etc. But tons of people come in, and the border states said, why? Why do we have to shoulder all of this by ourselves? And started shipping it to other places that were more left wing and said they were more open to immigrants. So you're open to immigrants, here you go, here's immigrants. And now all of a sudden New York realizes, okay, well, being open to immigrants has consequences, right? And they're trying to adjust the best they can, and they're trying to be as welcoming as they can, but obviously some anger is building. And so why does Texas have to just deal with it? We all should deal with it, and it's of course a federal issue. And so they're not welcoming of immigrants, I am, but that doesn't mean that we have to make New Mexico, Texas, and Arizona deal with the whole thing.
Agreed.
No, it means that we all are responsible for our brothers and sisters that are both the immigrants and the New Yorkers and the Texans, etc. So now, to give you a scope of the scale here, there's different reasons for different parts of the immigration puzzle. There's folks coming in from Africa now as well, but Venezuela is an interesting example. Just a bunch of years ago, like around 2018 or so not that long ago, there's only 100 Venezuelans that had come into the country in the year. Now that number is up to 150,000, okay? Now Venezuela has giant problems in and of itself, right? But it gives you a sense of scale. So it is very difficult to figure out where to put these folks. How do you get them jobs? Now, I didn't know this until recently. Asylum seeking, of course, takes a little while. Everybody knows that. But it turns out the process normally takes 3 to 4 years.
Correct, yeah.
So what are you supposed to do in the 3 to 4 years? Well, that's why they're asking for those work authorizations, both AOC, Eric Adams. An interesting note here, Eric Adams, generally a conservative Democrat, Kathy Hochul, generally a corporate Democrat, and AOC, a progressive Democrat. But all three of them are saying very similar things, like, okay, good, yeah, but yeah, we're hurt, dog. And federal government, you need to help, right? Well, where were we when Texas was saying the same thing? Let's be honest and fair to everybody, okay? So, but now it's New York's issue and some other states. Let's go help them. And you know it's bad, not based on the numbers, but this is the most telltale sign. When corporate Democrats like Kathy Hochul, and I would put Eric Adams in that bucket too, when those two come out against Biden, that almost never happens. That is defying authority, right? And that is not allowed in the Democratic Party.
Well, their political careers are on the line because
Bingo.
The anger in New York is very obvious, right? Look, I feel like it's a story that has largely been ignored or downplayed, and that's the problem that I have with this story overall. Just the lack of interest in what these communities are currently faced with, because their economic situation was already dire with divestment in education, divestment in certain social programs. You know, after the pandemic, obviously it takes a while for things to kind of get back to normal. A lot of people had lost their jobs. Like, it is already a dire situation. And then on top of that, New York was not ready. It did not have the infrastructure in place in order to take in all of these migrants, right? And so what they're now dealing with is, okay, New York City specifically has a right to shelter policy, meaning anyone who asks for shelter must get the shelter, which has actually made New York a far more desirable place for these migrants to go to. So the dominant narrative so far had been, oh, Texas Governor Greg Abbott is the one who's busing all of these people or sending all of these people to New York City. But he actually accounts for a small fraction of the migrants who have arrived in New York City. So I want to take you to graphic 5 here, because as the New York Times reports, after crossing the southern border, thousands have made their way to New York with the help of officials in Texas. Governor Greg Abbott has sent thousands in a campaign to provoke outrage and force the federal government to tighten border security. So he has done that to an extent. However, Abbott's buses account for only a small fraction of the people who have arrived. El Paso, a Democrat-led city, has also sent new arrivals to New York at the migrants' request, officials there have said, and some people have made their own way. So because of the fact that New York City has this right to shelter policy, obviously, if you're coming here as an asylum seeker, as you're going through the asylum process, as you're essentially waiting to have the ability to work here legally, you're gonna need a place to stay. And so naturally, people are going to gravitate toward parts of the country that have these types of policies that are far more friendly to individuals in need of shelter.
Yes, and guys, when we all feel the quote unquote pain, as in budgetary pain, overfilled schools, overfilled shelters, etc., we have to work together, left wing and right wing, to figure out what's the right number, what is the right policy. We can't just say, oh yeah, let them all in and let the border states deal with them, or don't let anybody in, right? No, let's have a rational policy, and then let's figure out how to sort immigrants. And by the way, fund a lot more judges. And I've been saying this for years and years. During the Trump years, during the Biden years, you need an army of judges so that some people who don't have documents aren't sitting around for 3 or 4 years. And because if they do, one, it's a giant problem for them, but two, it's also a giant problem for us. So if they can't get gainful employment, they're gonna have to eat, and they've got family.
That's right.
So they're gonna have to do something, and you don't want that to fester. Some of that could be incredible positive energy, and some of that could be negative energy.
Well, let's keep it real. A lot of them end up working, in the, I don't know what it's called, unofficial market. Basically, instead of taking jobs where they're documented and where they have at least some ability to protect themselves through our system, they end up working kind of underground economy. That's the word I was looking for. They work in the underground economy where exploitation is common, abuse is common. So a lot of these migrants end up getting abused as a result of that. I don't know who is advising the Biden administration about how expediting the workers' visas is a bad idea because it's going to encourage more people to come to the United States. But either way, there are currently so many people in the country already in desperate need of workers' visas. And if you don't give it to them, what are they supposed to do for 3 to 4 years? And I get that, like, look, some just say like deport them all. But based on our laws, we can't do that, okay? So members of Congress, really this falls on them and their inability to just do their jobs and actually pass legislation, immigration reform. The last time there was any conversation about immigration reform was back in 2014, and that failed, that fell apart.
No, guys, you feel like it can't be real, can it? I mean, at least that's how I felt when I was younger, like that the people in power don't really know what they're doing, and they've set up these super incomplete and inefficient systems where tons of problems arise, and then they never fix them. They never go back and go, well, not only did we blow it in the beginning, but I see those giant glaring errors. Man, we just won't fix them.
I know.
That seems unconscionable, right?
But we'll complain about them.
Yeah. So, but the government is broken. The only thing that ever passes is corporate subsidies and corporate tax cuts. So we've got to. I've said this for 20 straight years now. I've formed Wolfpack to fight against it. But if you don't fix money in politics, nothing ever gets fixed. because the only thing that ever passes is subsidies to corporations, and this stuff festers and festers. Guys, it's a giant problem for those immigrants. They're lying on the streets, they're gonna get abused, the underground markets are terrible in a lot of ways, etc. But some of them will turn to crime because they're not gonna have any choices if they can't work and they have to feed their families, right? Okay, then we're gonna have a bigger problem. Is it because they're naturally bad morals or criminals? Of course not. Undocumented immigrants commit crime at half the rate of natural born Americans, right? But if you put them in a situation where they have no choice, not only will some of that arise from some percentage, but then it'll anger everyone else and it'll make them turn more against immigrants, and it creates a vicious cycle. So especially with right-wing media waiting out there for like 1 or 2 bad crimes.
No, it's exactly right.
And then they're gonna focus on them and pretend that that's what represents all immigrants that have ever come into the country. So it's a bit of a time bomb. And let's go, Biden, do whatever you need to do to, he's gotta do, guys, one last thing, sorry, Anna. He's got to start doing everything by executive order, because these lunatics in the House, they're never gonna allow him to pass anything. They can't even fund the very, very basic bare minimum of the government. To think that they would do immigration reform is inconceivable.
So let me actually get to that real quick, because I think it's important to kind of talk about how Biden is now going in the way of Donald Trump with Donald Trump's immigration policies. Let's go to the last graphic here. The Biden administration also announced a new asylum policy that disqualified most people from applying for asylum if they have crossed into the United States without either securing an appointment at the official port of entry or proving that they had sought legal protection in another country along the way. The policy was struck down by a federal judge in July, but was upheld on appeal while legal challenges to the policy work their way through the courts. So it's not just Biden being able to do things unilaterally, much like Trump did, to be quite honest with you. It's that our judicial system also sometimes gets in the way of actually implementing some of the policies that could at least temporarily alleviate some of these issues, but it is a Band-Aid on a gushing wound, and it's really important to keep that in mind. If you just rely on the, President of the United States passing policy through executive order, it's just a flimsy way of dealing with a much deeper issue that we have here. We are in desperate need of reform that needs to be done through Congress, and Congress is broken. So the next time you hear any lawmaker complain about the migrant crisis, ask them why they're on X, okay, complaining about it, when they're literally United States representatives or senators who could actually do something about it. Let's take a break. When we come back, we've got more news for you, including a 30-year-old sheriff's deputy in Los Angeles getting shot and killed in an ambush-style attack. There's a mental health angle to this that I think is important to discuss. We're gonna do that when we come back. We'll see you then.
All right, back on TYT, Cenk, Anna, and Zachariah Hooper. Zachariah has picked an auspicious day to join us, Justice Day. You can join him by hitting the join button below the video on YouTube or tyt.com/join. Come and join the community. I'll read it throughout the day, but so many people are writing in about how much they love this community. And we're an open, honest community. And by the way, today we're gonna do this really interesting thing in the bonus episode where we're gonna talk about happiness and how to get to happiness. So it's an amazing community. All right, Casper, what's next?
Let's get right to our next story.
29-year-old Kevin Salazar arrested early yesterday after an intense standoff in Palmdale, California. He's expected to be arraigned tomorrow for the shooting death of Deputy Ryan Klinkenbroomer.
A 30-year-old sheriff's deputy in Los Angeles County was shot and killed in an ambush-style attack. Luckily, a suspect, as you can see in the video we just showed you, has been arrested. But before we get to how authorities discovered who the suspect was and what led to his arrest, here are some details about the incident and tragic shooting itself.
30-year-old Deputy Ryan Klinkenbroomer was shot and killed Saturday as he pulled up to a red light in his patrol vehicle. Surveillance video from the sheriff's station's own camera capturing the moment the suspect vehicle stops next to the officers, then takes off. Deputy Klinkenbrummer, engaged to be married just days ago, leaves behind a grieving family and a department mourning his loss.
Now, a resident in the area actually happened to come upon his police cruiser and saw that he had been shot, obviously immediately called the authorities. That led to the manhunt. At that point, authorities had put out a $250,000 reward for anyone who had any information that could lead to the suspect. And eventually, they were led to the Palmdale home of the 29-year-old suspect, Kevin Cataneo Salazar. So a few more details about that. So he admitted allegedly to killing the deputy, according to multiple law enforcement sources who spoke on the condition of anonymity because they were not authorized to discuss the ongoing investigation. He was linked to the case after someone who had been in a road rage incident with him came forward and then helped identify him. Deputies recovered numerous firearms at the location, meaning at his home, as well as the Toyota Corolla that was linked to the brazen killing, according to the LA County Sheriff Luna. The vehicle was captured on surveillance video pulling up beside Klinkenbrummer's marked sheriff's vehicle Saturday before driving away, moments before the deputy was found fatally shot in the head. Now, the suspect's family was unable to explain how it was that their family member was in possession of so many firearms. Marley Salazar, the 29-year-old's mother, said that her son is mentally ill, that he had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia about 5 years ago, which has been an ongoing battle. And so before we get to some comments from the family members, just some thoughts about the shooting itself, Cenk. I was actually kind of shocked to find that these ambush style attacks on law enforcement have been going up significantly. There have been 83 so far this year. 101 officers shot, 15 fatally, according to a report this month from the Fraternal Order of Police.
Yeah, so look, the cops are part of society and in two different ways. One is that they're not immune from gun violence. And in fact, a lot of times, of course, gun violence comes to their door, or they go to the door of the gun violence. And oftentimes it's random, as is the case in this situation with someone who obviously had mental illness issues. And so we're gonna talk about that second part in a second. That was really complicated, really hard, but we've got to start having an honest conversation. But the second way this cops are part of society is that they're human beings that are part of our communities. And this poor guy and his family, both his fiance, his parents, etc. It's just absolutely heartbreaking. We want justice for all, okay? And that means everyone. So I don't want people thinking in binary ways, this race versus that race, right versus left, cops versus citizens. What is the issue that we've had with cops is that they are not considerate enough of the citizens, but we should not make the same mistake. They are our fellow human beings and we should look out for them. And when you see something like this, I hope that it's heartbreaking for you as well, because that's a fellow human being that should be with us today. And it's terrible that he lost his life in this way.
Absolutely, and look, they're investigating the motive, but the suspect's mother says that it was his paranoid schizophrenia that led to this. In fact, why don't we go to his sister discussing his mental illness, then we'll give you some quotes.
His family says Cataneo Salazar suffered from schizophrenia and had been placed on multiple 72-hour psychiatric holds.
When he had his episodes, we would call cops. Cops came to the house. They should have it on the file that he was sick. He was mentally ill. He heard voices.
Cataneo Salazar's mother and sister say they feel for the family of the slain deputy.
I am so sorry for the family. I don't wish no pain, nothing. I mean, if I could just wake up and say it was all a dream for the family as well as for us, I wish I could do this.
Now, the mother, Marley Salazar, had an interview with the Los Angeles Times and said the following: "My son is mentally ill, and if he did something, he wasn't in his full mental capacity. It's not my son that did it, it's the disease that did it. They are putting all this out there that my son killed someone, but nobody is saying that my son is sick. He's sick. And so many people talk about schizophrenia, but then nothing happens. She also told the Los Angeles Times that he had stopped taking his medication about 10 months ago, and that the family didn't push back on that because he seemed calm, he seemed okay. But listen, the decision to stop taking the medication was a decision that the suspect made when he was lucid, when he was aware of what was going on. He made that decision, and that decision unfortunately spiraled to this horrific tragedy. And so I think that this story, and many other stories that we've covered, but I think I've been afraid to just say what I actually think, and I'm just gonna say it now. There are some people with severe mental illness who need to be institutionalized against their will. It's just the fact of the situation, the fact of the matter. And for those who think that that is unbearably cruel, I just wanna ask you, what is crueler, okay? Allowing people to stop, paranoid schizophrenics to literally stop taking their medication, refuse to take their medication, refuse to do the treatment they need to stay, mentally aware, healthy mentally, and then basically have a situation spiral to a point where they could end up murdering someone, they could end up in prison for the rest of their lives, and an innocent person ends up dead. Is that the humane avenue to go in? I don't really understand. There are some people who are gonna refuse the treatment, or there are some people who are so mentally unwell that they are a danger to themselves and to others. And to have this system where it's like, I don't know, let's just ask him if he wants to get the mental health treatment. No, some people are not gonna consent to it, even though they absolutely need it.
Yeah, guys, so here's where we require nuance. So if you're an ideologue on either side, you can go ahead and turn off now. If you think there's simple answers and they're extreme and they're all correct. No, so everything works in percentages. Almost everything is in a spectrum. So sometimes when we talk about the mentally ill, people get really sensitive about it for understandable reasons, because they have someone in their family who might have similar issues. And a lot of them, the great overwhelming majority of them, have nothing to do with violence, right? And so those folks then get triggered and go, what do you mean? No, the mentally ill aren't violent. But brothers and sisters, we're not talking about your family members. It's a spectrum. So the huge majority of that spectrum are not violent, okay? But is there a part of that spectrum that are violent? Of course. That's not even a question. If you're saying, no, there's no mentally ill people in this country or in any country that are violent, that's not, you're just living in a fantasy world. Now, does that mean you lock up everyone who's mentally ill? Of course not, right? Can you overcommit and undercommit folks who are having significant mental health issues? Of course, like in the bad old days, anyone creates any kind of issue, sometimes based on nothing, not even mental illness, something that they didn't meet the mores or the culture of the day, they just lock them up. And they put them in these horrible places where they would be terribly mistreated.
Right.
Do I want to go back to those days? Hell no, hell no.
It's not the 1950s anymore.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and so now if you say, now I don't care where they are on the spectrum and how violent they potentially are, I don't want to commit anyone without their permission. Well, they can't give you informed permission if they're in a psychotic state, right? Or in whatever state the doctors say they can't really consent, right? So then by definition, if you're in that group, you're saying we should commit no one. So if someone is violent and they're walking around and they're threatening people, just let them. No, that doesn't make sense.
I agree.
Look, guys, if you think that makes sense, you're saying something so absurd. Here, I'll give you a tiny little example. This is not a big deal, but I'm just telling you, like in my neighborhood, there's a homeless woman. She's actually not quite in my neighborhood. She's about 5-6 blocks down the road, okay? She's got a machete. And so it took a while for the cops to come and get the machete away, et cetera. And the only time that they did that, tons of people complained, okay? But they didn't do anything, that's another story, right? But eventually, what did she do? She took a mom and a tiny kid and held them hostage with a machete. Now, if you say that's her freedom, you're nuts.
Well, there are lots of people, unfortunately, who say that's her freedom. And I want to give you examples, okay? So In the state of California, one of the potentially good things that Gavin Newsom has done is he has implemented something called the care court system. Now, it just got implemented this month, so we'll see how it plays out. But he has gotten a lot of backlash from certain activist groups and civil liberty groups within the state. Let's go to graphic 5 here. The care court program aims to walk the line between forced treatment and completely voluntary treatment for those with the gravest needs, so severe mental health issues, okay? Disability rights groups decry it as a violation of a person's civil liberties and a potential path toward conservatorship and the loss of legal rights for those who repeatedly decline care. By the way, conservatorship shouldn't just automatically be a dirty word. There are some people who need to be placed in a conservatorship. There are some people, I mean, it's very, very rare that it happens these days anyway, but I think because of what happened to Britney Spears, people think like, ooh, conservatorship, super dangerous. Like, we don't want a system like that. But some people literally need it for themselves and for others. Care Court survived a legal challenge from Disability Rights California and other civil rights groups earlier this year. The group sat on a state working group for the program's implementation and will monitor its rollout. So they actually have a say in how it gets rolled out, but they kind of want to just defeat the whole program to begin with. The program was welcomed by some family members, okay, family members of those with severe mental illness who have complained the state's privacy and patients' rights laws only allow their loved ones to be compelled into treatment when in crisis.
Yeah, so I'm not at all surprised by the family members saying that. Remember, they're the ones that have to deal with someone who's constantly saying, I'm gonna commit suicide or homicide, or and all of these things. God, a lot of you do have family members that are in this condition. You know how hard it is, right? And so you wanna help them in every way that you can. And sometimes people cross over the threshold of they're gonna need professional help. And God, I want that professional help to be actually professional and compassionate and caring and decent, etc. And we have to absolutely make sure that it is, right? But for the folks who say that it just shouldn't even happen, I don't know what their alternative is. So what are we now, massive libertarian right-wingers and we go hashtag freedom? Okay, so I'll give you another one. And don't think that like this is something that's like haunting me because it happens to be in my neighborhood. It's just random examples from my neighborhood, okay? But it gives you a sense that it's a little bit common, right? And so another guy, this time very close to my house, with a spear, okay? And he goes up to a black neighbor of mine and starts yelling at her and says, you're gonna die, you N bitch, okay? She's like, not only am I scared to death, but I've got a 14-year-old who's got to walk to the bus. And this guy's walking around and he's been yelling the N-word on the streets. He happens to be white for like days. And cops come and then he throws away the spear and then he goes, but he's cognizant enough, and that's why his is maybe not a great example, but he's cognizant enough to say, well, I didn't say I'm going to kill you, I said you're going to die. And so they just let him go, right?
Yeah.
So like, look, that has a lot of different issues about criminal laws, policing, etc. That's complicated. But in a situation when somebody says, I'm gonna go around killing people, and they've got a spear, they got a machete, they're obviously mentally unbalanced. If your answer is, yeah, go ahead, like let them just do whatever they want, you don't really believe in laws. You believe in anarchy, and that doesn't make any sense at all. And that's not justice for all at all. That's saying, I don't give a damn about you. And I don't even care about that guy. You think that guy wants to walk around with a spear? You think that lady wants to walk around with a machete? No, they're having problems. And we need to help them. We don't need to beat them. We don't need to be angry at them. We need to help them. But just leaving them on the streets is not at all helping them. Not at all.
Totally agree. All right, we got to take a break. When we come back, Rudy Giuliani is facing more issues, including a lawsuit from a friend of his, a friend that's been one of his friends for 50 years. That and more coming up. Don't miss it.
on TYT on Justice Day. Cenk, Anna, and Tommy Treverthen. Tommy, welcome, brother. Great to have you. Casper, what's next?
We've got an update on Rudy Giuliani. He is having a rough time, so let's talk about it. Rudy Giuliani, who is already under criminal investigation and at risk of losing his law license, is now also getting sued by his former attorney for failing to pay over $1 million worth of legal fees. Making matters worse, the individual who has decided to sue him is a longtime friend of his. We'll get to that in just a moment. But the lawyer, Robert J. Costello, who had been leading Giuliani's defense against an onslaught of legal woes, signed on to the lawsuit brought by his firm on Monday to recover more than $1.3 million in unpaid legal fees. In all, Costello's firm has billed Giuliani more than $1.5 million, according to the lawsuit. Of that, Giuliani has paid only $214,000, most recently handing over a measly $10,000 just last week. Now, according to multiple people with knowledge of the situation, Giuliani owes quite a bit of money. In fact, he owes nearly $3 million to various law firms, including the one where Costello is a partner. Giuliani had repeatedly sought a financial lifeline from his client, Donald Trump, who had offered vague promises to pay up, but had largely refused to do so. Now, Trump, of course, is notorious for not paying his bills, which is part of the reason why he has gone bankrupt 6 separate times. But Trump also has his own legal bills to worry about. And on top of that, he did offer to help to some extent. So Trump's Political Action Committee did recently pay off more than $300,000 that Giuliani owed to a different company. And Trump hosted a fundraiser for Giuliani's legal defense fund. So there is some assistance, want to be fair and mention those things. But much of what Giuliani owes from his work is from his work essentially challenging the results of the 2020 presidential election. He racked up legal bills while battling criminal and congressional investigations, private lawsuits, and also disciplinary proceedings. Costello's law firm, Davidoff, Hutcher, and Citron, worked on his now closed foreign lobbying federal criminal investigation, the January 6th related investigations by Georgia state prosecutors, the House of Representatives, and the Federal Special Counsel's Office, and in various lawsuits and attorney discipline probes that materialized after the 2020 election, according to a complaint filed in New York State court on Monday. So before we get into the frenemy situation that Giuliani now finds himself in, what do you think, Cenk?
Okay, so Trump did help a little bit. I mentioned on another show that where we covered that story, but it's about 10% of his bills. So I guess if I'm Rudy, I'm like, I'll take it, but it's just not gonna get the job done. So if you owe a couple of $1 million, you still owe a couple $1 million, and that's not easy to get past. So as I look at Rudy now, every time I see a picture of him or video of him, he looks like two things to me, if I'm being honest. One is just a totally broken man, and if you didn't live in New York, you might not, or you weren't paying careful attention to politics, you might not have a sense of how much Rudy Giuliani was revered after 9/11. I mean, he was called America's mayor, and people meant it, and they loved him. They loved him in New York, and Republicans loved him all across the country. And so he didn't help himself afterwards. And by the way, was that earned? I could argue that it wasn't, okay? So he has a complicated history. Some of it is pretty decent. The 9/11 response was good in a lot of ways. He put the Center for Response in the World Trade Center, which made no sense. I can go on and on about the things he did wrong and a couple of things he did right. But as I look at him now, it's hard not to feel, not empathy, but as a progressive, I feel some degree of sympathy for this obviously broken man. Now his friends are suing him. He's begging Trump on a daily basis. Trump is giving him the crumbs off the table. He's broke. He's just, and he might go to jail soon.
What I want to know is, does Rudy Giuliani have a single family member who gives a damn about him, right?
And that's another thing that's really sad, because that's such a good point.
Right, if that was my father, for instance, I actually don't know about his family situation. I don't know how many kids he has, but it doesn't matter. If that were my father, right? If I saw him aligning himself with nefarious figures, if I saw him basically threatening his future with all sorts of liabilities and all sorts of, I'd put him in a headlock, okay, gentle headlock though, I don't want to cause too much damage, and I'd lock him in a basement, and I'd be like, Dad, it's over, okay? No more public life. You are going to destroy everything you have worked for your entire life. And it just shocks me that it seems like not a single family member of his is stepping in to say, hey, you need to relax, okay? This is bad, and you're destroying everything for yourself.
And look, even the Republicans and people very close to Trump confirmed that he's got a drinking problem, right? And so you add that to the mix, and then we know what happens, guys. Fame warps not just you, but everything around you. So he does have a son. His son was trying to milk him.
Right.
So, I'm famous. I'm Rudy Giuliani's son, and he ran for political office.
I forgot about that.
And he was clown extraordinaire, and he's been a clown his whole life, right? And so instead of helping his dad, he's trying to milk off his dad.
It's disgusting.
It's just gross in every way. And then another thing is he's got the hunch now. And I'm gonna be a little bit of a jerk here, but he reminds me a little bit of a broken penguin. Like Kingpin has won the bad guy things. I'm combining Spider-Man and Batman here, but like Penguin works for Kingpin, and he's like, right, and like things are dripping down his face, and he also kind of looks like Uygur working for, and Frankenstein's running around, and there's Uygur going, help me, right? And so it's an epic disaster. It's a story of, not America's decline, but an American's decline. And we've all seen it right in front of our eyes. But at the same time, it's hard to have sympathy when this guy was part of the team that tried to do a coup against America. From hero on 9/11 to doing a fake elector plot where you would overturn the presidential election and have the guy that lost the election be crowned as the winner and destroy our democracy, destroy the idea of America. Sorry, Uygur, but that's what you get.
Now, finally, let's get to the relationship, the personal relationship he had with Costello, which has now been destroyed. So the two men have actually known each other for like half a century, 50 years. Costello trained as a law student under Giuliani, who at the time was a federal prosecutor in Manhattan, and they became friends. For the last 4 years, Costello was a loyal defender of Giuliani's, both on an attorney-client basis, but also publicly. And in a statement, Giuliani decided to essentially lash out at him and say that he's pretty much hurt over this lawsuit. He says, I can't express how personally hurt I am by what Bob Costello has done. It's a real shame when lawyers do things like this, and all I will say is that their bill is way in excess of anything approaching legitimate fees. Now, Costello initially declined to comment, but after Giuliani had put out that statement, he decided to respond, and here's what he said. How can he take a personal affront when he owes my firm nearly 1.4 million? And look, that's 100% true. This is why you probably should not engage in any business with friends and family. Like I think most of the time it's a bad idea. Very rare instances it doesn't fall apart, right? In this case, it fell apart. And so he's absolutely right. It's not just about Costello. This is his firm. Okay, there are other lawyers, there are other people that they've billed 1.4 million and Giuliani has failed to pay up.
Yeah. So look, part of me says no honor among thieves. I mean, if you ask your friend to represent you, you ran up a giant legal bill. So now you're catching feelings that he's gonna charge you. Did you think that he was just gonna let $1.4 million go and everybody at his firm was gonna let it go? And then to his so-called friend, did you think Rudy was gonna pay you? You don't see him, both as a friend and as a client, you don't see him falling apart at the seams? So you thought you were gonna get paid. What you thought he was gonna get the money from who? Donald Trump? Oh, and now you're upset that you're not getting the money from Trump and Rudy. Color me surprised. And so if you thought you were gonna get that money, you're a bit of an idiot. So I don't have a lot of sympathy for you either. Okay, so the thieves are turning on each other. So final thing here is, guys, when people make the turn, Liz Cheney on drawing the line and saying, no, I might be Darth Vader's protege, but I still believe in the country and I don't want to end democracy. and Mike Pence saying similar things. It doesn't mean we love Cheney and Pence. It doesn't mean all is forgiven. It doesn't mean you should vote for either one of them. But it does mean that's when we show some degree of grace and mercy. So if Rudy ever flips on Trump and he means it and he's honest finally, then that's when we should show him mercy. But as I write in Justice Coming, no mercy until you win.
No cookies for you.
Yeah, no cookies for you. If you're still going around going, well, it'd be great if we just got rid of democracy. It'd be great if Trump won and he pardoned all of us and we went back to being the dictators that we want to be and take away all your freedoms and rights. No deal, Rudy, no deal at all. But if you actually come to your senses, then yes, I think we should help him because he is not just broke, he is a broken man.
When we come back, Donald Trump does something that's potentially smart. Don't miss it.
Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Young Turks. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, Cenk Uygur, and I'll see you soon.